Jonah the Wolf by Mickey Sylvester. Narrated by Mickey Sylvester. Chapter 1. Get Out of My House. Janet Stroud entered the old house through the front yard, where she had a path made for prospecting buyers. The dusty, wide entrance felt cold and uninviting. Overhead loomed a cobweb-coated chandelier. Janet struggled with the light switch, trying to get it to work. The old estate was in need of some repair, but in the realtor's eyes, the land value was well worth the asking price. For some odd reason, though, other agents could not seem to get rid of it. That was where Janet had stepped in. She specialized in selling old properties that everyone else had trouble selling. Janet had not got the reputation of being an old hard-ass for nothing. She was the type to go above and beyond to make a sale, and that was how she had managed to buy her 1999 BMW Z8. She didn't care at all about the history of the place. If she had it her way, she would go to every public library, from Addison to Windsor County, on a mission to erase its history. She was not the type, nor would she not hesitate to erase every bothersome shred of a newspaper article or archival material that had shone a bad light on something she wanted to sell. She scurried plumply from room to room with her flashlight, notepad, and pen, her reading spectacles perched on her nose. She scribbled down anything that she thought needed to be tweaked or patched up before any prospective house buyers came to see the estate. She knew it was the negative first impressions that kept the prospecting buyers from investing their time and money into refurbishing old houses. She had heard rumors that the previous owners had gone mad while living here. Some reclusive family that had isolated themselves like a bunch of modern-day Luddites for years, until one day they all just snapped and had set to killing each other. It was father against son, brother against brother, or so the stories had been told to her. They were awful tales, and not only stories that were told of those that had lived here before. She scoffed at the house's dark history, at the tales of it being haunted or even cursed. People die every day, and not just in their sleep. Many die. Many meet horrible deaths, commit suicide, or suffer from other terrible tragedies. There should be more than enough spirits in the history of mankind to haunt the entire earth and bother all of the living. There was not a place on earth that should not be haunted by some of the other violent death. Funny how people who believed in the supernatural never thought of that. As she walked round the nursery room, she started to shiver. She hardly noticed it, being so preoccupied with her note-taking that it was a little while before she noticed that her own breath was visible in the air. Damn, it's cold in here. She rubbed her hands together. I'll bet the walls are like paper. She pressed her foot on the mildewed floors, testing to see if they could hold her weight. The wood flooring groaned as Janet ventured across the room. She went to the only window in the room. Someone must have painted over very thickly, so not a single ray of light could penetrate. It felt as if no one had been in this room for at least a decade. Janet imagined that children had slept in this room. The old gas heater in the corner looked as if it had been here since the turn of the last century. It looked rusted, sitting there in the corner of the room, abandoned, and left to rust away under a sheet of ancient cobwebs. Janet sighed. Such a terrible thing for a child to be left unattended around. Something like that, even in those days. In her mind, she saw the little children running around the room, loud and rambunctious, being joyful, as children always have been. Janet could almost hear their laughter, their frivolity, and she smiled like a proud parent. Suddenly, the laughter she heard began to melt. It warped and twisted in her head until the horrifying sound of children screaming made her crumple to the floor. The boards buckled beneath her as their screams grew louder and louder. The floorboards around her exploded. God! Janet tried to move, tried to flee, but her body ignored her commands. She felt numerous little hands tearing through the breaking floor, coming for her. In her mind, she saw the tiny, howling faces flying at her from the darkness below. They clung onto her, their weight pulling her down into the dark place that had never seen the light of day. No! Janet screamed defiantly. The touch of the children's hands were like ice. In the distance, she had heard a cell phone ringing. Janet opened her eyes and looked around and saw that nothing had changed. There were no broken floorboards, no haunting children's faces with empty eye sockets crawling with little black spiders. The cell was in her purse. The notepad was scattered across the floor, and her pen was in the corner of the room. The small flashlight she had been clutching in her hand rolled slowly across the floor. She cursed as she glanced down at the warm puddle of urine beneath her. Luckily, she had an extra set of clothing stashed in the trunk of her car. The smell of urine made her loathe the situation more, but at least she had been alone when it had happened. The last thing she needed was one of her loose-lipped employees finding out that she had wet herself. She yanked the cell up to her ear and feigned a tone that was much happier than she felt. The caller sounded muffled and far away. Janet cursed the spotty connection in the area, knowing there wasn't a phone booth for at least a mile. "Hello, Janet? This is Hal Romick. Remember that place you showed us last week? Well, I've discussed it with my wife, and, well, we're going to take it." Janet listened to Hal as she went around the cold room, gathering up her things off the floor. She was listening to Hal's voice, but not paying much attention to what he was saying. In her hand, she clutched the notepad, staring in disbelief. The words, "Get out," had been scribbled in what looked like a child's handwriting. Without another thought, Janet was out of the nursery door. Behind her, the door slammed, making the chandelier in the entrance below jingle. "I'm so sorry about that, Mr. Romick. But when do you plan to come down again?" "I see. Yes, I'll be here." "Okay, thank you, and I'll see you then." She hung up the phone and looked back at the nursery door. "To hell with it. I'm as good as gone from here. And now, with this goddamn place is finally being sold." She hurried down the stairs and stopped short of the chandelier, which was swaying and twinkling as if it had a life of its own. The window must be open. There's no reason to get panicky. It's just an open window, or perhaps an open door. Slight chill blew on her, stiffening the sparse little hairs in the back of her neck. Goosebumps appeared on her arms. It felt as if someone was standing right behind her. "Shit," was all she could mutter before she ran towards the entrance door. Overhead, she heard the sound of the chandelier as it started to sway. The tiny twinkling sound swelled until all she could hear was the insistent sound of twinkling crystal. In a panic, she tried the door, but it refused to budge. The handle wouldn't turn to let her out. "Let me out of here," she demanded. "Let me go." Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a shadow taking shape, looming over her and growing large. Her breath was visible in the air. "God, have mercy on me," Janet sobbed. "Don't, please, don't." Just then the door had finally unlocked, and she pushed it open. Racing to her car without looking back, she fumbled for the car remote and activated the car engine. Without a second thought, she was in the car and then accelerating it down to the highway. It took a while before Janet took her foot off the pedal, and then she glanced back through her rearview mirror. The door to the house was wide open. Janet could have sworn that someone was there, looking back at her. She couldn't make out the details from such a distance, but she could feel their eyes on her, and she started to panic all over again. As she glanced up one last time, she saw that the door had slammed shut. Janet sighed with relief. She was finally going to get rid of that cursed